In this lesson, what I want to do is carry on talking about the debates within socialism. In the last lesson, we talked about how different socialist ideas and different socialist thinkers understood and viewed the role of the state within society. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the role of economics and how the economy ought to be structured in a socialist society. And we'll begin by talking about the fact that economic policies under the traditional socialism, under the tradition of socialism, tend to have a number of commonalities. There tend to be a number of things that most socialist thinkers agree on when it comes to how the economy ought to be structured and what the economy ought to do and what economics ought to exist for. And these include things such as class inequality, so equality among classes and equality more generally, things such as equity and redistributive justice, being able to redistribute resources in a just and equitable manner to achieve the most equitable outcome, effectively, to achieve the most equal outcome for the most people. However, these are very broad prescriptions, so these are generally very broad prescriptions. And they don't really talk to our deeper understanding that we need to really understand. So we need to have a deeper understanding of what we mean when we talk about these things. These are very broad prescriptions, and there are a number of different ways in which we can achieve these aims. And it's for this reason there is a lot of disagreement among socialists when it comes to the state of economics and where it fits within their socialist utopia, effectively. And we'll begin with the classic socialism and the classic communism, that of Marx and Engels. And as we've already seen, Marx and Engels have been highly critical of capitalism. We talked about the fact that they critique capitalism through the lens of ideology. They critiqued capitalism using theories such as sociological theories. Okay, they used psychological theories. And then they've also used theories of economics as well to critique capitalism. Ideology, if you want to understand how ideology fits through and how the ideology of capitalism is like a lens through which we view society, that's what Marx and Engels argued. You read something like The German Ideology, a book written by Marx. From a sociological perspective, capitalism creates exploitation and therefore class consciousness, and it also separates between the worker and the owner class. From a psychological perspective, the state of exploitation and the exploitation of the worker's labour leads to a state of alienation, which could eventually lead to this class consciousness and an eventual want to overthrow the capitalist system. And then obviously we'll talk about economics now and the state of exploitation and the labour theory of value. So according to Marx and Engels, capitalism creates a state of exploitation, which leads in turn to the alienation of the workers, which leads in turn to a class consciousness among the working class, among the proletariat. And so therefore a revolution will replace capitalism and we'll have the common ownership of the means of production. So this is from the economic standpoint, okay? So Marx and Engels believed in what we call the labour theory of value. So the labour theory of value. And if we want to have a specific citation, we'd read something like Capital Volume 1. Capital Volume 1. It's mainly Volume 1. But the labour theory of value states that value, economic value, in the products that we purchase and the services that we utilise, okay, which ironically is quite interesting considering that Marx and Engels didn't really account for the growth of the service economy. It wasn't as big of an issue when it came to economics in their time. But anyway, the value of these products come from the labour that goes into these products. Okay, they argued that labour, plus some natural resource. This is something that a lot of socialists tend to forget about, the fact that you need to have labour plus some natural resource, some natural means of production, leads to value. From that we derive value. and commodity value, the value of commodities. And so therefore those who own the means of production are simply exploiting the labour of these people, of the workers, of the worker class. And in order to do so, they exploit the labour and they sell their commodities on for a profit. And so therefore they're not making anything, as according to Marx and Engels, the owner class. And so therefore a revolution that will take the common ownership of the means of production, we take the means of production, the things that the owner class bring into the spectrum, and then we create a dictatorship of the proletariat that serves as a transition period into a state of communism. And this is ultimately what Marx and Engels argued was the true process by which economics should progress from a socialist perspective. Now, other variations of socialism will disagree with this conception. Now, we know that Beatrice Webb was an evolutionary socialist, and so argued that socialism should be achieved through slow reform from a parliamentary system, through parliamentary government, and that this can bring about a socialist state. So we know that that's what Beatrice Webb believed about the state and socialism, the idea of the state and socialism existing together. However, when we're talking about economics, Webb believed that the existence of the state can gradually bring about the common ownership of the economy. So from an economic perspective, okay, Beatrice Webb didn't necessarily disagree too much with Marx and Engels from the specific standpoint of economics, because they believed that there ought to be a common ownership of the economy. So there ought to be a common ownership of the economy, namely the means of production. But whereas Marx and Engels argued that this is something that can be achieved through revolution and through a dictatorship of the proletariat, seizing the means of the production, Beatrice Webb argued that this can be achieved through evolutionary measures, through parliamentary reform, parliamentary government, and that this state can eventually bring about reforms and policies that lead to this common ownership of the economy. Now, other theorists, more modern theorists, like people like Crossland, argue that nationalisation policies that took place under the Labour government of post-World War II, so namely Clement Attlee, were enough, and further nationalisation were not necessary. So according to some early social democrats, so we'll just say early social democrats, the concept of the nationalisation policies that took place under the Labour government, so the nationalisation of a number of different industries and the creation of what we would describe today as the modern welfare state, so for example the NHS, these are all things that were very, very good according to the likes of Crossland, but they were also, these were enough, according to Crossland. These were enough to achieve the kind of economy that can achieve these growth and equity and equality and redistributive policy, redistributive justice. All of these things can be achieved under the Labour government's post-World War II, under the nationalisation policies that existed back then. They argued that the Keynesian approach to an economy could lead to growth and equality. Now, we know what the Keynesian approach is. We talked about the Keynesian approach in a previous lesson. And we know that this is something that many people would describe as capitalist, including myself to an extent. This is something that is effectively a capitalist system. And if we think back to that lesson when we talked about the contradictions between having or trying to reconcile socialism and capitalism together, we can note that even though this the concept of social democracy and these kind of and democratic socialism as well, these kinds of new theories of socialism, they all spawned out of and came from the traditional Marxist understanding of socialism, and so therefore they do believe that there is a compatibility between the economy, and you might want to argue that social democracy is effectively a capitalist system. I wouldn't disagree with you effectively there, but we still have to note that these are theories that are born out of the traditional socialist understanding. And we can see that there is a clear distinction between what Crossland would argue as achieving and the end goal for an economy under a social democracy compared to that of Marx and Engels.